Are we going again, or are you putting bars in?
Couple of bars.
Couple of bars.
Downtown Johnny's and Barclays in Saratoga.
I think the story I have kind of illustrates that a little bit too.
Start paying attention.
You have a specific remembrance that illustrates it.
Well, I think, you know, it's kind of a humorous thing. It's almost been blown out of proportion, at least in my life anyway. You know, my remembrance of it was the, back when John Dyson showed up at the Senate Finance Committee with his mask on, I was trying to figure a way to outdo him or something. And I had just come back off vacation. I had grown a beard. First time in my life I had grown a beard, and it was kind of scraggly looking. And I went to, it was my confirmation hearing for the Commissioner of Mental Retardation. And I wore it at that thing, and I made some remarks about better a beard than a mask. And I happened to run into the governor, I guess it was in the office here, we were talking about something, he came through, and he said, "You did a good thing and a bad thing." And I said, "Oh?" And he says, "The good thing was you shaved your beard off, and the bad thing," he says, "was you hired 2 Republicans," which I had just done. And that points it up. You know, I was able to hire 2 deputy commissioner and an associate commissioner over at MR who were dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, but were good men. And he just acknowledged that, and I guess it was a rebuke. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just, ha-ha, you thought you'd get away with something and I caught you on it, but not fire them. Keep them on because they were needed to do the job we had to do. And that was the way he ran.
Ta-da.
Yeah, I like it.
Your experience with Hugh Carey precedes his second term, and maybe even precedes the first term. Right?
Oh yeah, I go way back when he first was elected to Congress. And I was on the Democratic ticket for Lieutenant Governor 20 years ago, and he was running for Congress.
And what happened? Well, anyway, as you look back over his experience prior to becoming governor, you know, so that's the period of preparation. But within the 8 years that he served as the chief executive of the state of New York, what do you think? What do you think his contribution was to the people of the state of New York and then the state, sort of in general?
Well, I think his contribution was that he, first of all, probably others have said the same thing, but he saved the state from bankruptcy, as well as the city of New York, city of Buffalo, city of Yonkers, and many other subdivisions. But he did it in such a way that he was able to preserve the human services, and he gave a lot of emphasis to human services. I think that's the man that I like to remember, the man who was really concerned about mentally retarded people, kids especially, people that were mentally ill. I mean, he saw to it that they did not suffer by the financial strains that were foisted upon the state. And at the same time, he was able to lower taxes and improve the condition of the state so economically, so that because of Hugh Carey, we have a state which is in excellent condition, considering the fact that we're in a recession. I think all those things put together make a marvelous record. I mean, somebody could have come in maybe, as Reagan has in Washington, said, well, we're going to bite the bullet and everybody's going to get hurt, but we're going to try to, you know, turn the economy around. And Governor Carey didn't do that. He did turn the economy around, but he did it without hurting a lot of people. And he did it by, you know, with a lot of compassion. But he was tough. He's a very tough guy. He's got a marvelous sense of humor, but he is stubborn and tough, and because he had those attributes, he was able to accomplish a great deal for the people, in my opinion.
If Hugh Carey hadn't been governor in this critical, as it works out, space of 8 years, what do you think might have happened?
Well, I think New York City would have gone, I don't know if the city can legally go bankrupt, but they were virtually bankrupt. New York City would have been in chaos. I think other cities then would have followed. And I think the state would have been in chaos too, because we weren't going to be able to pay off our bonds. They would have had to raise taxes substantially. Businesses would have left the state left and right, and I think we would have been, you know, in such a bad state that it would have been almost impossible to turn it around.
You're the right man at the right time.
He was the right man for the right time, exactly. And I think he surprised people. I think people thought, you know, he was an articulate, bright man, but I don't think coming into that first term that people, after, you know, 16 years of Rockefeller, 1 year, or 15 years of Rockefeller, 1 year of Wilson, that this man coming in was going to have the guts and the ability to surround himself with people who, you know, who are expert without regard to politics, and really, you know, bring to bear his personality to turn this thing around. And I think people saw him as a bright congressman, a guy that was committed to a lot of good things. But they had no idea, you know, what kind of a governor he was going to make. And he certainly made a terrific one.
A couple of years from now, John, down the road, and you are doing whatever you're doing, and you look back to the Carey experience, or whatever they're going to end up calling, you know, his 8 years in office. What's going to come to the surface for you in your memory?
Well, I think what comes to the surface is that the man, well, two things. First of all, sort of on a lighter note, you might say, I see the man who, when we're in his office or behind the scenes with him, sort of very serious and troubled sometimes, and then he can get off a plane and start talking to people and being very funny and very light and very, you know, very effective as a campaigner. He can just do that at the snap of a finger, go from one mood to another, which I think is rather interesting, and not everybody can do that. And I think also, I will think of having had the honor of playing a role in an administration which did such a good job for the people of the state of New York, and I'll be always very proud of that.
How about your personal relationship with him?
Well,
and going to the, I think, misconception that he was difficult to work with.
he was not difficult to work with. I always got along very well with him. I go back many years with him. I must confess that, you know, in his first campaign, I made the tragic error of having come out for Howard Samuels. And I don't think he really ever forgave me for that, but I've tried to make amends and atone for my sins. But in any event, I forgot what.
That's all right.
I forgot. Can you cut that?
You came out. You came out for Howard Samuels.
Yeah.
But you ended up being, you know.
I ended up being, you know, his appointments officer and one of his, you know, closest staff people, and I think that says a lot for him too. And a lot of people think, you know, if you're not for Hugh Carey from the beginning, you're cast into the outer darkness. Well, I'm an example that that wasn't true. There are other examples too, but I think that I found him to be a highly intelligent person to work with. He was always very friendly with me. I never had any problems whatsoever on a personal basis. He was always lovely to my wife and to my family. And I just, you know, we always enjoyed visiting with him and Mrs. Carey whenever we had the occasion. And it was just a fine relationship.
Good. This is too much like my old job. I forget how to do it. I've asked everyone, and I'll ask you, from where you sit now and where you have sat in the Carey administration, what do you think Hugh Carey's contribution was, first to the people of the state of New York, and then to the state in general?
From a transportation point of view, and as you know, that I've been in that a long time, the accomplishments of these 8 years, primarily the interstate program and completing it against all the odds and all the court cases, and the support that the governor gave us was it's a tremendous undertaking, and it is now completed and successfully done. And the 6 bankrupt railroads that the governor had on his hands, and him going out to the people with a bond issue and obtaining the approval of that $250 million literally saved the railroad industry in this state. And coupling that with the excitement of the governor in the disasters that he and I worked together on, and the snow squall in Buffalo when the helicopter was to go into the South towns and he was looking for a passenger, and Tom Fry and Tom Regan and myself all allowed as to how there wasn't room on the helicopter, and he took off by himself, and I often wondered what he was thinking when he had those 4 vacant seats in that helicopter. But just the excitement of working with him and the nerve that he possessed on the campaign trail in an Amherst situation where we had 10,000 students literally screaming their heads off from him. He stood up and took them on, and it came off as one of the best campaign stops that we had. And the Love Canal situation, when he was willing to step into that fray with those hundreds of screaming property owners, and he was able to leave them with the satisfaction that they knew that their cares were going to be taken care of. And his willingness to do the unusual thing, to buy those 600 houses. What other governor would have thought of doing that and would have had the nerve to do it, indeed, under those circumstances? And to go into those disaster areas, that's the kind of situation crisis that he was just as good at as he was in the general governmental crises. And that's what I had a great deal of admiration for the nerve, the PCB, the Shelter Island situations. They were also unique in their own way. And I found that excitement was worthwhile coming to work every day just to be a part of it.
A couple of years down the road now, and these things begin to mellow, and whatever you might be doing, you are going to look back, let's say, sort of out of the blue, and think about your experience in the Carey administration. What do you think is going to percolate to the surface?
Oh, there isn't a doubt in my mind that I will always remember the governor in the times when my son was dying, and he was so very compassionate. And when I had my heart attack and my heart surgery, 5 times he came to the hospital to see me in 5 days. And it's that kind of compassion that I know that the person has. And that's a very personal thing, but you can't help but remembering him for that. And it overwhelms all of the good things that he has done as governor. You attach to those personal relationships that you have with him.
Across the board, you look to all the different program areas, and every commissioner, I think, is an observer of the big picture as well as concentrating on his own particular responsibility. Hugh Carey, did he care?
He cared about the good government role. He was willing to take on the fare increases for MTA. He was willing to come up with capital dollars to do the job that had to be done. He was willing to go with a whole new local roads program that hadn't been done. We tried to get it done for 10 years, and he was willing to go after it, and we got it done last year. It'll create a whole new way of rebuilding the infrastructure of the state from a local roads concept, and that's the way he cared. He cared for the good government aspect of it all, and he was able to get it done, and that's the thing that impressed me most. We had some tough legislation, the parkways that we brought into the system, and we're saving $10 million a year just on the maintenance alone. He was able to accept a program that we gave him and then get it done. That's something that few people have that ability to understand and then do it.
Yay, team! Wayne and I on the red tie.
Yeah, okay.
And I asked the same question of everybody,
Sure.
and they
Yep.
respond to it. From where you sat in the Carey administration and from where you went and became more of an observer and sort of working outside of government, what is the nugget that you can share with us as to Hugh Carey's contribution to the people of the state of New York and then to the state sort of in general?
Well, you know, Bill, I think the contributions of Hugh Carey will be measured best several years from now. We've seen a state that has been in transition and a country that's been in transition, and his leadership came at a time when the subtleties of change were probably hard to observe on a day-to-day or week-to-week, month-to-month, and year-to-year basis. But there was a recognition here by this governor of the things that needed to be done in a time of change in our country and in this region especially. And I think he provided someone who, as a political leader in government, who listened, observed, and could sense the things that needed to be done. And now I'll sort of mix between my government career and my career now in the private sector. But at the time he came to office, you know, we've all know of the fiscal crisis and the impact and what that meant. But he had a sense that there was a need for a rebuilding in our state, and that it couldn't be rebuilt with tax dollars or huge state spending, because that era had passed. You know, it was a period when I was in government that we had to get more out of what we had, and he was a good leader for that. But he recognized that the rebuilding would have to come in the private sector if the state, and really the whole Northeast was to, I don't like the word survive, but let's say transition into a new era. And I watched him as we brought, in my later life outside of government, business leaders together who would talk to him about what they saw as the needs for the private sector to be able to grow again in New York, and he responded to those. And watching that kind of a transition where the idea and concept that, hey, we've got to get jobs for people in the private sector. We've been able to take up the slack in this region, in this state, by a growing employment in government. Now we don't have the money to carry that forward. He did help us to put in place, and he did provide the leadership for programs that got companies and small business and large investing in New York State again and creating private sector growth. And I think that recognition came at a very critical time in our state, and it's positioned us for, we call it the new industrial revolution, the new tech, the high tech. He could see that, he sensed it, he put us in place, and I think the longer view, as New York State really emerges as a leader in the new economy, the new economic realism of our country, that New York will be at that leading edge because of the things that we were doing day to day, week to week, and month to month. And the best evaluation of him, I think, will come that we came through that period, we positioned ourselves well, and we'll get that growth.
Let's, if we can, move ourselves at least a couple of years down the road. And you, for whatever reason, not having any contact with the governor, let's say, from the time that he left office, and you look back in a moment of recollection, what do you think is going to percolate to the surface about your appreciation of Carey the man?
Well, I think it was the ability to recognize that government exists really to serve people with needs. At least state government has as one of its basic missions. We're not really involved in national defense and so on. And he kept that in the forefront. As we went into very difficult periods in the state, so that I'll say the human service programs were able to be continued, as we reorganized and as we rebuilt the economic base of our state. So I think in looking back, there was that, underneath that concern in Hugh Carey about those programs to keep them alive until we could, excuse me, until we could get our state finances in a position to provide for those kind of programs. And it was there.
Did Hugh Carey, in the real sense, care?
I think much more than most of the people of our state saw or recognized. Because of his public character, I don't think we ever, as a people, got a full grasp of his depth of concern in this state. And, you know, I'm one of the fortunate people, having worked with him prior to his becoming governor of our state, and then as governor, as a member of his cabinet, and then later from the private sector. That care was basically there, but it didn't show in public. And it was probably one of the real qualities of Hugh Carey, was that as programs had to change, as different issues had to be faced, that care was always there, and somehow we coped with the problems of the poor and the aged and the handicapped and disabled and the mentally retarded at a time when other states were shedding those concerns. And I think we've positioned ourselves now as a state to continue that kind of service to our people. But the care was there, and I know that you know, and we all know of, you know, very personal incidences where he was involved in that kind of caring, and he was an amazing person. I used to call on Hugh Carey as a member of the Congress in my days in the Rockefeller administration as a commissioner of DOT, and Nelson Rockefeller, when I would be going to Washington to try to obtain money for the subway systems or the transportation systems or the highway construction programs in our state, Nelson would always say, "Go see Huey." And Hugh Carey was a member of the